On our 20th wedding anniversary, my husband handed me the divorce papers. He said that instead of a gift, he wanted to get married again. I was speechless. But then my oldest daughter said, "Mom, just get a divorce, look at this." When I saw the photo she showed me, I screamed with joy and signed the divorce papers on the spot. I never imagined I'd write something like this, but I think I need to get it out there. It's going to be a long text, so I'd appreciate it if you're patient enough to read it to the end. Daniel and I met in college. It was a normal day. I was in line for coffee, and he bumped into me. He dropped his books, apologized, and gave me that awkward smile. That's how it all began. After that, we started running into each other in the halls, chatting, and before long, we were together. We were young. I was 21, he was 23. We didn't have much money, nor big plans, but we believed in love. We talked about building a life together, having children, living in a simple house. Those things we dream of when we're young. We married quickly, against many people's expectations. Some said we were too young, that it wouldn't work. But we believed love was enough. We lived in a small apartment with donated furniture, doing everything our own way. It was difficult, but it was good. Over time, our daughters came along. The first, then the second. Daniel was a present father, always helping out, waking up at dawn and making a point of being at school parties. I looked at him and thought, this is the one I want to spend the rest of my life with. But things started to change. Little by little, he became more distant. He started working more, arriving late, traveling frequently. When I asked if everything was okay, he said yes, that it was just work stress. I believed him, because I wanted to believe, because thinking something was wrong hurt too much. Even through it all, I kept trying. I took care of the house, the girls, our marriage. I tried hard to keep things going, and he just kept pulling away. But he never stopped being polite, so I thought it was just a bad phase. Then our 20th wedding anniversary arrived. I thought, I'll do something special. I cooked dinner at home, put on our favorite music, and got dressed the way he liked. I thought maybe that would rekindle something between us. The girls helped set everything up. Everything was ready when he arrived. He entered silently. He didn't say anything about the decorations or the dinner. He sat down, took a deep breath, and took an envelope from his pocket. He placed it on the table and said, "Instead of a gift, I'd like this." I opened the envelope thinking it was a letter, a note. I don't know. But it was divorce papers. He looked at me and said, "I've met someone else. I want to marry her." I was going to wait longer, but I thought this was the right time. At the time, I couldn't say anything. I was in shock. I felt a huge void. It was as if everything we'd ever experienced had been thrown away right there in front of that envelope. I didn't cry right away. I remained silent. Only later, when he left, did the tears come. The girls arrived shortly after. My oldest daughter, Lara, immediately realized something was wrong. I tried to hide it, but I couldn't. She hugged me and said, "It was Dad, right?" I just shook my head. She took out her phone, fiddled with it a bit, and said, "Mom, just get a divorce. Look at this." After that night of our anniversary, I was in shock for a few days. It was like I'd been thrown into a dark hole with no way out. I walked around the house, did everyday things, but everything was on autopilot. I couldn't quite understand what had happened. We'd been together for 20 years. 20 years. And suddenly, it all ended like that, with an envelope on the table. That same night, after Daniel left, I sat alone in the living room for hours. I couldn't sleep, couldn't even cry properly. My head wouldn't stop. I started remembering everything we'd been through. The beginning of our story, the hardships, the joys, the births of our daughters. I thought about all the times I believed in him, that I bet on our love, that I defended our marriage even when everything was going wrong. It hurt so much. The next day, I woke up with puffy eyes and a tired body. The girls went to school in silence. The youngest didn't understand much, just felt the strange atmosphere. The oldest, Lara, was serious, a little angry, but also sad. I tried to maintain my routine, making coffee, taking care of the house, but it felt like time had stopped. Daniel didn't come home that day. He didn't call either. He sent a short message saying he was going to stay at his brother's house for a while and would talk to me later. I didn't respond. I didn't even know what to say. That night, when the house fell silent again, I cried everything I hadn't been able to before. I cried so hard my chest ached. It was as if all the pain I'd been holding in came out at once. And in the midst of that crying, anger came. Anger for having believed for so long. Anger for having ignored the signs. Anger for having made a fool of me. I felt used, discarded, betrayed. In the following days, Lara began telling me things I'd never noticed. She said she'd suspected her father's behavior for months, that he was always hiding his phone, that he'd lied a few times about going to work, but she'd discovered he was elsewhere. He said he'd seen strange messages but never had the courage to show them to me, until that day. It was then that she showed me the photo. It was a simple image, but it said it all. Daniel was embracing another woman in a restaurant. The two were laughing, holding hands. The photo had been taken by one of Lara's colleagues, by accident, and he ended up sending it to her, thinking it was just a coincidence. But it wasn't. That was the woman he left me for. The woman he wanted to get married again. When I saw that image, something inside me flipped. It's strange to say, but I let out a cry. Not of sadness, but of relief. It was as if for the first time I had a clear answer. I wasn't crazy. It wasn't my fault. I'd been deceived, yes, but now everything was out in the open. At that moment, I took the divorce papers, signed them all at once, and said, "That's it. Now he can go. And so can I." After that, I began to see things more clearly. I began to remember situations I'd ignored. The calls he'd answered when he wasn't around, the deleted messages, the lame excuses. He'd been distant for a long time. I just didn't want to see it. I thought if I loved him enough, things would get better. But they didn't. The hardest part was explaining everything to our youngest daughter. She's only 10. At first, she thought her father was just traveling for work. When she realized he wouldn't be back anytime soon, she was confused and sad. I tried to explain it as gently as possible. I told her that the love between her father and me had changed, that we were going our separate ways, but that she would always have us close by. She cried a little, but then hugged me tightly, and that gave me strength. I started talking more with Lara too. She became my support system. We started doing more things together, talking about everything. I realized she was almost a woman now, and that she had a perspective on things that surprised me. She'd say to me, "Mom, you deserve more. He hasn't appreciated you for a long time." And hearing that from my own daughter made me think about everything I've accepted over the years. I remember one night in particular. We were sitting on the couch watching a movie, and she said, "Mom, you spent too long trying to fix something he'd already broken. Now's your chance to rebuild yourself." And those words stuck with me. That's when I realized the worst was over, and that I needed to take care of myself. Daniel, after receiving the signed papers, texted me saying he hadn't expected me to be so fast. I thought it was funny, as if he had the right to dictate my time. I simply replied, "You were already gone a long time ago. I'm just putting this on paper now." Since then, he's been coming to see the girls from time to time. His relationship with them is still awkward, but he tries. I don't interfere, because I think, as a father, he still has a duty to be present. But with me, I've kept my distance. You can't be friends with someone who hurts you like that. These days, I've found myself looking in the mirror and asking myself, who am I now? Because for a long time, I was just Daniel's wife. And now I'm learning to be me again. It's not easy. There are days when I wake up sad, when I feel empty. But there are also good days. Days when I genuinely smile. And those days are starting to come more often. If you've made it this far, thank you for reading. This outburst is already helping me move forward. In the next chapter, I'll tell you how I learned more about the other woman and how this made me understand even more about everything I've experienced. After signing the divorce papers, I started trying to move on, but to be honest, I still had a lot of doubts. Even with the betrayal confirmed, even with everything Daniel had done, part of me still wanted to understand better. How did it all start? How long had he been with her? Was it just her, or had it happened before? Lara, my oldest daughter, started helping me with this. She was angry, but also very practical. She said she'd already started gathering some information on her own, even before I knew everything. She was uncomfortable with her father's behavior and had suspected it for a long time. She was the one who really pulled the strings on this whole thing. One day, she called me into her room and said, "Mom, I want to show you something, but only if you want to see it." I took a deep breath and told her I wanted to. I needed to know. She opened a folder on her computer and started showing me some conversations she'd taken screenshots of from her father's phone. One of the times he'd left it unlocked in the living room. The messages weren't very direct, but I could tell there was an intimacy there with a woman. They called each other honey, "I miss you," and scheduled meetings at odd hours. She also showed photos he'd posted on Instagram but later deleted. In one, he was seen with a group of friends at a bar, and the woman was there, always in the background. But in every photo from the past few months, she appeared. I'd never noticed. Lara also said that the woman's name is Juliana, and that she's a colleague of Daniel's. They started getting closer over a year ago, when they started working together on a new project. According to her, several people at work already knew about the relationship, except me. This devastated me. Knowing that I was the last to find out, that others knew about the betrayal, was one of the hardest parts. I spent days thinking about it. I felt ashamed, betrayed again, but also with a strange sense of relief, because with each new detail, I saw that the problem was never with me. He made choices. He chose to lie, hide, lead a double life, and I chose to trust, to continue, to sustain a relationship that was already broken without me knowing it. I started remembering several situations from last year. There was a trip he said was for a conference, but now I know he was with her. I remembered a weekend when he said he was going to visit his sick mother, but later found out she wasn't even sick that day. He lied, looking me in the eye. It still hurts me to this day. I also talked to some of my friends. One of them, who works at a company near his, said she'd heard rumors about the case. When I asked her why she never told me, she was embarrassed. She said she thought it wasn't her business, that maybe I knew and just didn't say anything. I don't judge, but it hurt to know that even my friends suspected it, and no one told me anything. Little by little, I began to accept that perhaps my marriage had already ended long before that anniversary dinner. I just didn't understand. Or maybe I didn't want to understand. I clung to the idea that he was the same man from the beginning, the same present father, the partner of so many years. But he had already changed long ago. One thing that really struck me was when I found an old email from Daniel. It was a message he'd sent me in the early years of our marriage, telling me how much he loved me and how grateful he was for everything we'd shared. Reading it now was like being punched in the gut. It was hard to believe the man who wrote it was the same man who dumped me so coldly and quickly. But I also started to think differently. If he'd changed, if his feelings had faded, then maybe it wasn't fair for me to stay stuck in that relationship. Maybe I was trying to hold on to something that no longer existed. I thought I was fighting for the marriage, but in reality, I was fighting alone. Over time, I tried to shift my focus away from him and start looking at myself. What did I want? What did I feel? I had spent so many years taking care of others, Daniel, the girls, the house, that I had forgotten about myself. I no longer remembered what I liked to do, what made me happy. Lara started insisting we do things together. We went for walks, went to the movies, ate ice cream in the square. Little by little, I began to feel that there was still life beyond the pain. There was still joy, affection, lightness. I began to remember the woman I was before marriage, before the routine, before the disappointments. And then something strange happened. An old friend from school messaged me. She saw a photo of me with the girls on social media and asked how I was doing. We started talking, and one day she invited me for coffee. I almost said no, but I ended up accepting. It was good to get out, talk about other things, reminisce about old times. I actually laughed that day for the first time in a long time. Of course, there are still bad days. Some days I wake up sad, missing my old life. Sometimes I find myself remembering Daniel with longing, not for the person he became, but for who we once were. And I think it's okay to feel that way. We were together for so many years. You can't erase everything overnight. But what I've learned is that we don't have to carry it all alone, that it's okay to need time to heal, to understand, to start over. And that, even in the midst of so much pain, it's possible to find pieces of peace and joy. They're there, waiting for us to find the strength to see them. After everything came to light, I gradually began to look more closely at myself. For many years, I'd put myself on the back burner. My life revolved around Daniel, the girls, the house, and work. And when the marriage ended, I realized I didn't even really know who I was anymore. In the first few days after the divorce was finalized, I still felt a bit lost. It was as if a part of my identity had disappeared. I was no longer a wife. Now I was just me, and that scared me a little. At the same time, I began to feel a kind of freedom I hadn't felt in a long time. Lara was the first to notice this in me. One day, while we were having breakfast, she looked at me and said, "You look different, Mom. You're lighter." It took me by surprise. I hadn't even noticed, but it was true. I no longer carried that weight around in my chest all the time. I started sleeping better, eating more eagerly, laughing at silly things with the girls. I started doing some things again that I'd neglected for years. I started taking walks in the late afternoon, listening to music on my headphones. I rediscovered my old passion for reading and started reading before bed. I picked up some books that had been sitting on the shelf for a while. I also started taking care of my hair and clothes again, not to please anyone, but for myself. One thing that really struck me was when I went to the movies alone for the first time in years. Before, I'd only go with Daniel or the girls. But that day, I decided to go alone, my way. I chose the movie, bought popcorn, sat in the middle row, and let myself enjoy it. It may seem silly, but going out alone and feeling good about it is a huge victory after so long feeling small. The girls also began to feel this change. Lara especially told me she was proud of me. The youngest, even though she was small, seemed calmer. I think when we improve inside, everything around us improves too. The atmosphere at home became lighter, happier, even without Daniel around. He still came to see the girls from time to time. He always gave them advance notice, sometimes taking them out, other times staying only for a short time. I let him, of course, because he's a father, and they have a right to spend time with him. But our relationship remained strictly practical. No arguments, no unnecessary conversation. It was just the essentials. One day I received a message from a friend inviting me to a dinner with other women who had also gone through divorce. At first, I was afraid to go. I thought, what am I going to do in a place like that? I don't know anyone, but I went. And it was one of the best decisions I ever made. I met incredible women, each with a different story, but all with one thing in common. They had been left, betrayed, or hurt, and yet they were moving forward. Talking to them made me realize I wasn't alone, that the pain I felt was shared by others, and that, in a way, strengthened me. From then on, I began to open myself up to new possibilities. I'm not talking about a new relationship, not yet, but about allowing myself to experience other things, meet new people, and put myself first. For the first time in a long time, I felt free. Not the freedom to wander aimlessly, but an inner freedom to be who I truly am, without fear. Lara noticed this. One day, she came home with a simple gift, a small blue-covered notebook. She said, "For you to write whatever you want, Mom. Thoughts, plans, dreams." I started writing in it every day. Sometimes, just venting. Other times, lists of things I wanted to do. It was as if I was building a new beginning there. Word by word, little by little, I felt stronger. There were still sad days, of course. Days when I remembered Daniel and everything we'd been through. But those moments began to diminish. And when they came, I let them feel it. But I didn't let them dominate me. I learned to live with the longing and the pain, but I also learned that they don't have to control me. In this process, I realized I hadn't lost everything. I had my daughters, my friends, my home, my story, and above all, I still had myself. It was as if, after years of being lost, I was beginning to see myself more clearly. This rebirth wasn't quick or easy. It was slow, full of ups and downs, but it was real. And strange as it may seem, today I'm grateful for having gone through it all, because it made me stronger, more aware. A few months had passed since the divorce. I was moving on with my life, caring for the girls, returning to old habits, and slowly trying to build a new routine. Some days were easier, and others were harder, but overall, I felt better. It still scared me to think about the future alone, but now I no longer felt as lost as I had before. I didn't look for him, and he hardly ever looked for me either. Our communication was all about our daughters, and always by text. We didn't fight anymore, but there was no friendship either. It was a cold and distant relationship, and I preferred it that way. One day, by chance, I ran into Daniel at the supermarket. I was buying bread and fruit when I saw him in the cold cuts aisle, along with his new wife. He saw me too. For a few seconds, no one said anything. I felt a tightness in my chest, I confess, but it was different from what I imagined. It didn't hurt like before. It was more of a discomfort, like that feeling you get when you remember something that's already happened, but it still leaves a bitter taste. He gave me an awkward smile and said, "Hi." I replied with a calm, "Hi." The woman with him didn't even look at me. She just turned away and continued pushing the stroller. He tried to make conversation, asking about the girls and if they were okay. I responded politely, but without opening the door for further conversation. Then I said good afternoon and left. When I left the market, I sat in my car and took a deep breath. I didn't cry. I wasn't sad, but I felt like that meeting was like a full stop. I realized right then that I was truly free, that I didn't want that life anymore, that I no longer missed what we had. Maybe I missed the idea I had of our marriage, but not what it ultimately became. When I got home, I told the girls I'd seen their dad. The youngest just asked if he was okay. Lara was silent, then said, "Are you okay, Mom?" I said yes, that everything was fine, and it really was. Little by little, my relationship with them grew even closer. We started doing more things together, like cooking, watching TV shows, and planning outings. I created a routine with more time for myself and them. On weekends, we'd go for walks in the park, eat ice cream, or just stay home listening to music. Small moments that once seemed simple but now had a new meaning. One thing that helped me a lot was writing. I kept using that blue notebook Lara gave me. I wrote almost every day. Sometimes they were long texts. Other times, just loose sentences, ideas, thoughts. I even wrote a few letters that I never sent. One of them was to Daniel. I wrote everything I wished I had said the day he served me with the divorce papers. I poured it out, unfiltered. Then I put the letter in a drawer and never touched it again. I didn't feel like sending it because I realized I no longer needed his response. I just needed to get it out of my system. Over time, other good things began to appear. I received an invitation to return to teach at a school near my home. I had already taught before stopping to care for my family, and I had always loved teaching. Returning to the classroom gave me a sense of purpose. I felt useful, alive. The students, the conversations, the smiles, all of it did me so much good. I also started meeting new people. No serious relationships yet, but I made friends with other mothers, co-workers, and even neighbors I'd barely spoken to before. Little by little, I began to feel part of the world again. And that's when I met Andre. He's the father of a student at the school where I work. We started talking at parent-teacher meetings, and then we ran into each other a few times by chance. He was a down-to-earth, calm, and always polite person. He treated me with respect, something I'd been missing for a long time. We started talking more, unhurriedly, without expectations. I wasn't sure if I was ready for another relationship, But I didn't close the door. For the first time, I felt I could choose calmly, without pressure. I still don't know what will become of us. Maybe it will become something serious, maybe not. But the most important thing is that this time, I'm in control. I'm choosing what feels good to me, not afraid of being alone, not trying to please anyone, just listening to myself more. Today, when I look back, I no longer see just pain. I see growth. I see a woman who suffered, yes, but who had the courage to rise up. I learned that we can't control what others do, but we can control how we react. And above all, I learned that we deserve to be truly happy, with sincerity, with respect. I still have difficult days, of course. There are moments when I feel empty, a longing for things that will never return. But there are also light days, beautiful days, days when I wake up wanting to live. And that, for me, is already a lot. For those who've read this far, thank you for listening. Writing this was a way to put things right inside me. And if you're also going through similar pain, I can only say, don't give up on yourself. Things change. And even after the end, life goes on. Sometimes better than we imagined.